In this section, we're going to look at the impact of democracy on Indian society. First, we're going to look at what economic and social policies did India implement. It's going to be split into two parts. However, one's not going to be economic, one's not going to be social. It's going to be pretty intertwined because they go together so easily. First off, policies to promote economic growth, to grow their economy. Nehru really admired Stalin's achievements of rapid industrial growth in the USSR. They went from a largely agricultural nation to one of the main superpowers on the planet when it comes to industrial power. But it was a very bloody change. Millions died. He believed a similar system of state involvement of the economy and centralized planning would help India's economic development. However, India favored a mixed economy with some central planning and a private sector outside of government control. And so this means they wanted some central government planning, but also private business too. So they're not going to go the complete Stalin route. They're not going to go the complete American route. It's all private. It's going to be a mixed economy. And so projects will include state-sponsored things, run by the government, private businesses, and then we'll see some mixed things where we have government investment, private investment working together. So really he's not for capitalism or communism. He's attempting for the best of both. 1950, the Indian Planning Commission was created. This is chaired by Nehru. Nehru's got his hands in everything, to formulate plans to promote economic development and improve living standards. And so they were given a lot of power, wide powers, to massive funding to implement a series of 5-year plans. And so 5-year plans are very common in communist nations, and Nehru's going with that method, but he's not going to go as extreme as we saw in Russia or in China. So it's not going to be capitalistic in that in capitalism there is no central planning. It's all the invisible hand, free market economics, where in this case it's going to be a lot of government planning, the hopes of progress. And so they go through a series of plans headed up by the government. The first plan, 51 and 56, was to increase agricultural production, to feed themselves more. Second plan, 56 to 61, was large-scale industrial development. So this is very similar to the Chinese patterns and the Russian patterns of development. This is where he's getting a lot of his ideas. The third plan, 61 to 66, make India self-sufficient in food, more industry, and decrease dependence on imports. So it's kind of a copy of the first two, just kind of keeping up on food and industry, more factories. For every single one of these plans, it also is going to include the goal of reducing unemployment. So they want more food, and more factories, and more jobs. The second 5-year plan is an interesting example, in that it especially is going to focus on unemployment. Starting in 1950, only 12% of India was actually employed in factories. The vast majority were on farms. And to really develop as a nation, we need to get people off the farms into the factories to better use your people. So factories and building dams could help rural unemployment and population pressure on the land, and that there was just too many people, and it was just too much pressure on the land to produce for all that food, and it was just too many farmers, not enough land. Collective bargaining was recognized by the government, so this is the right to form unions and to strike, and so they didn't completely get rid of unions at all. Employment security, health, and accident insurance is also guaranteed. And so you can't be fired for no reason. Health insurance is required of your employer, as well as accident insurance. If you get hurt on the job, the boss has to pay. So these certain rights are coming along as more and more people get into the factories. And so we can see the growth rates as far as what their plans were. The target is in the light purple, actual in the dark purple. So in the end, they are improving over their time. 5-year plan successes, what worked out well. Agricultural production did increase by 25% the first 5 years, an additional 20% in the next 5 years. So they did get more food over these first couple 5-year plans. Industrial production absolutely was great. It doubled between 48 and 64, largely financed by foreign nations. So other countries were helping to build these factories. And in the process, India gets unemployment, they get some investment. So it's a win-win. However, Nehru did work to avoid neo-colonialism. He didn't want to be completely taken over by foreigners again. And so there were high tariff barriers, high taxes on foreign goods, and state control of key industries. So they didn't want he didn't want to let the British come right back in to control all the main industries and for the Indian people start just to buy British things because they were cheaper again. So he was hoping to control that a bit. Green Revolution. After 1960, agriculture became the focus to make India self-sufficient in food production. And so GMOs were a good thing. There's a lot of bad things out there about GMOs, but they can be a good thing, and they saved millions of people in India. Look up Norman Borlaug, big GMO guy. He's saved millions of people. After 1960, he helped a lot through high-yielding seeds were introduced, irrigation was increased, chemical fertilizers were introduced. So new seeds that were going to be able to produce more food, more irrigation to produce more food, and we're also going to not be organic. We're going to try some chemical fertilizers that will produce more food. And so through these new techniques, we're going to get more food to produce and feed more people. However, the downside is that it did increase regional inequalities in that certain regions were not suited to the changes. They weren't ready for all these massive changes, or the seeds just didn't work as well in those areas. Plus, the wealthier farmers had greater access to this new technology, and the wealthier farmers could afford better seeds, better fertilizer, could afford to bring in irrigation. So the richer farmers got richer, the poor not so much. When it comes to capitalism, the government controls on who gets to do what were relaxed by the 1980s as India sought to enter the world's capitalist system. So a lot of these socialist programs where it's the government controlling everything really relaxed, and the Indian economy has grown exponentially since the 1990s. They're the number 10 economy now. They're growing quite a bit now that they're more free. And yeah. Policies to extend education. At independence, only 16% of the population was literate. A very small percentage could read. In rural areas, the average literacy rate was only 6%, and most women didn't attend school at all. There just was part of this cultural bias against women attending school. Nehru supported education as he saw a literate electorate as essential to surviving democracy, and as a means to bring economic and social transformation, meaning if people are able to read the news, they're going to be able to vote better. If they're able to have an education, they can get a better job. If they're able to get an education, they're going to treat people differently and change socially as well, become more modern. The Constitution guaranteed free and compulsory school, and compulsory meaning they have to go, for all children to the age of 14. And 1961 was the target date for this goal, but they had to keep moving it several times. They just didn't have the money, and it took a while to build up their schools. Government funding for primary, secondary, and technical schools. They're building up a whole lot of schools to reach these higher goals. And so it's building up education to reach so many other goals. Between 51 and 61, we start to see primary schools or elementary schools rise up. The number of boys in school doubled and the number of girls in school tripled. And we start to see a later increase in secondary school as thousands of these new schools were built. So first we got the elementary schools, then the high schools, the secondary schools, with the hope of these other changes in democracy and economic and social equality down the line. When it comes to colleges, by 1964, or higher ed, 41 new universities were built. And so we started, again, piece by piece. First they start the elementary, then the high school. Now they're going to build up the colleges by 1964. Female students made up 22% of the universities, so they're moving forward and getting more women educated. Technical and research universities emphasize science and technology on purpose. And so not too many history degrees coming out, but when it comes to building up your entire economy, you're going to want more science more than anything. And so science and technology to sustain the economic policies of industrialization and modernization, because they want to become an industrial power. They need scientists, they need engineers. However, they weren't getting paid as well as they would in Western nations. So after 1950, they started to see a brain drain. a lot of their best scientists and engineers started to leave India for better pay and better working conditions in the West mostly. And so we see a lot of people get educated, and then they'll leave India after they get their education. We see this a lot in America, as Indians are only about 2% of the American population, but they're about 20% of all doctors. And I'm betting the number is very similar when it comes to the field of engineering. And this is largely due to better pay, better working conditions in the West and in America as compared to India. So they have this brain drain issue. Health problems. 1950, population of 350 million. So that's about where we're at today. So, by 1950, the life expectancy is 32. And so it's not great. They got a lot of people. They're not living long. They're living just long enough to have a giant family. Millions are dying off of smallpox. They're still dying off of the plague, something we dealt with a while back. Cholera and malaria. Most towns had little to no sanitation, no indoor plumbing. The bathroom issue is pretty bad. Very little sewage issues, sewage problems. 1951, only 18,000 doctors and 115,000 hospital beds for all of India. There's a lot of polluted water, there's overcrowding, poverty, and a lack of medicines. These are all making things a whole lot worse. And so these are the issues they had to deal with on day one. They have a lot to work on. Plus, they have a high population growth rate, which is linked to more disease. So a very crowded situation, a lot of people sick, more people are going to get sick because it's too crowded. And so here's a look at their growth rate over time, and that they really need to work on slowing down this growth rate if they want to work on these other health issues. And so you can see this rate of change over time, and that just recently they have overtaken China when it comes to population. And that China started to have this curve here, and the US still way down here in our growth rate. So India has some work to do on their population growth. Health solutions. Here's what they did to fix the problem, really work on their problems. The government set up funds to improve health. So they set aside money to work on this. This was going to include training more doctors and nurses, building more hospitals and clinics to help their people. The number of hospital beds increased by 165% during the Nehru period. So then they're up to 1964. They're really working on getting more doctors out there, more help out there. The World Health Organization helped to launch immunization campaigns to work on some of these preventable diseases. Death rates dropped, while population growth began to rise, putting more pressure on land and resources. So there's good and bad there, and that because less people were dying and their population growth didn't slow, you get more people. And so they started to work on population with family planning programs introduced to slow population growth. This included propaganda to encourage people to have smaller families. Propaganda didn't work because of illiteracy. They couldn't necessarily read the propaganda. And there's also this long tradition of large families, so they have to work against that. Later programs offered incentives for people to have smaller families and offered voluntary sterilization programs, but largely haven't done enough. Social welfare. Nehru wanted to create a welfare state to improve the standard of living, a state in which the government is going to work to help and protect the people and the economy. Economic improvements were necessary to increase social welfare. To pay for all these things like healthcare, you got to have a better economy. And so they're going to focus on the rural villages and develop them a little bit more. First, with the Community Development Program, 1952. This promoted improvements in rural life, agriculture, communications, education, and health. So focus on the many villages and not the cities so much because the villages were far behind. So workers were sent in to promote self-help and self-reliance, and basically to get the villagers to stand up on their own and modernize on their own. We got some early gains, but the villagers only became more reliant on these workers and more reliant on the government. So this whole plan of getting the workers to rise up on themselves didn't work out so well. Panchayati Raj, 1959. This is the goal to increase self-government, more of getting the villages to stand up on their own. Villages would elect village councils to run their village, and so it's almost like a city council with a mayor and a local city council. The village councils would create plans for their community and would direct government funds for local projects. And so they'd vote for kind of a council of elders. The elders would figure out what's best for this community, ask for money from the government, and then build something based on what the community needs and wants. This allowed villagers to participate in making decisions, implementing development programs. However, some of these councils were just dominated by the rich, wealthier farmers who approved projects that would only benefit themselves. So they'd approve things like irrigation that would only help the rich farms. Plus, a lot of the state governments didn't approve of the program, which required state involvement. This would take money out of these state accounts directed towards the cities, and so there was a lack of support there. So we'll stop there and take a little break. The end of part 1.